we will move gently on with our subject matter from the 38 Blessings of Life today. When I last saw you a week ago, then we finished off talking about not leaving our work undone, I believe. Blessing number 14. And that came at the tail end of a series of values and practices, mostly to do with supporting harmony in the family life. And the financial part to that at the end was to do with making sure that our family doesn't become unharmonious because of financial problems. But today we sort of embark on a new higher step on the blessings, which is to do with looking beyond creating benefit solely on the level of our family and looking more to doing something for society at large. What's known as being a pillar of society. And the first blessing in this particular subsection is to do with practicing generosity. And I'll talk about it this time, and then probably next week I will pick up with the second part of it. And it is a subject which I have talked about on various different levels. If anyone's interested, they can look back through my previous talks, but generosity was part of sort of the cultivation of merits, which I talked about as part of Buddhist concepts, entitled Doing Good That Does You Good. And I also returned to this subject on a more basic level in a talk about greed and stinginess, which was entitled 7 Myths About Generosity. And some of the objections which we looked at during that particular talk were things like the welfare state makes generosity unnecessary, that generosity is only for rich people, that if your previous experiences of being generous haven't made you any happier, then maybe you shouldn't do it anymore, that generosity should be secretive or random, that generous people shouldn't expect anything in return, that generosity only counts for the poor and needy, and that generosity encourages corruption, bribery, and holy rollers. And if you've still got any of those sort of objections to generosity, then maybe you need to go back and listen to some of the previous talks. But my hope today is that by this point in your studies or the progression of my lectures, you're a little bit more sold on the idea of generosity as being an important thing to practice for yourself and your own spiritual benefit. And it'll allow me to spend a little bit more time today looking at how to fine-tune the way you practice generosity in order that it will become something more of a blessing in your life. So before we come to generosity per se, let's look at the sequence of this subsection on becoming a pillar of society, where you'll see that after the first of the subsection on being generous, number 15, then it continues on with practicing the Dharma, then looking after your extended family, and last but not least, working in a blameless way or ethical working practices. Seeing as you already have harmony in your family life, hopefully as a result of all the previous blessings which you studied, then even if you only manage to look after your family, you could consider that you've only really broken even in terms of the goodness which you cultivate in your life. You sort of sorted things out, you've got your family on an even keel. But to give something back to society, then you need to go beyond that. And this is where the blessings in this particular subsection start to come in, where we're starting to give back something to society. And to be the sort of person thereby that other people in society can trust and look up to be a good example of an upstanding member of society. So the logic of karma says we shall reap what we sow. And if we provide for the happiness of others through generosity, then the karmic outcome will be that we will be provided for in terms of our own happiness or convenience in the future. Ironically, the Buddhist perspective on generosity is sometimes characterized less by the material way gifts bring benefit for the recipient, but more for the spiritual benefits which come back to you as the giver. So it's not saying, oh, I give like £100 to charity, and what benefits does that bring to the people who get the £100? But Buddhism often turns it around and says, by giving that £100, what comes to you as the person who gave? Yeah? Little bit of strange. So Buddhism actually places importance on generosity because it is seen as something which attracts positive things into your life as the giver. And some of the things which you see both in the Buddhist scriptures and in scriptures of, let's say, Christianity are things like it's better to give than to receive, because it makes you happier. For example, people who donate blood tend to, on average, be happier than people who don't. Yeah. It also communicates something about your worldview, because if you're a person who hoards, then it's like you believe that, or your worldview is that there's only limited wealth to go around, and if we don't get it, then someone else will. So that reflects something about your personality. There's also research to show that if you are a giving person, you tend to live longer, and it increases your social connectedness, helping others to perceive others more positively and charitably, and to appreciate the interdependence between people, and to appreciate the importance of cooperation in a social community. It's also said that giving is contagious. Beware. And there's many real-world examples of pay it forward, which are inspired by people who show their generous side. Giving also helps to give your life meaning. It bridges the disconnect between who you think or say you are and who you actually are. And it also increases the self-confidence and trust in those who receive gifts from us, that they will do the right thing with what they receive. If you give or share to others, then it helps you to listen to them differently. And it also means that you look upon your own resources with less attachment. And it also helps to create lasting relationships, especially in things like marriages, and generally makes you a more likable person. So these are why generosity is considered to be an indispensable part of being a pillar to society. So within Buddhism, generosity is sometimes defined a little bit in a special way. The word for generosity used in the scriptures is the word dana, which you may have heard of before. D-A-N-A. Dana. And it means sacrificing your own possessions for the benefit of other people wholeheartedly, with the intention to honor their virtue of that person or assist a person of similar social standing, or to help someone who's worse off than yourself. So if you're not wholehearted about giving, then you cannot really consider it to be dana. And the word generosity, you notice, is a little bit broader than in some other religions, where it's restricted only to the poor and needy, because it can be also to people who you respect or people of a similar social standing. In a spiritual sense, dana sometimes refers to our intention to give, so it's a giving emotion. And sometimes it can also refer more broadly to things like abstention from wrongdoing, such as in forgiveness is sometimes considered to be a form of generosity. But we'll focus today on mostly on the more usual definitions for the word. In Buddhism, there's sometimes it's connected with this idea of the origin of happiness, because in Buddhism they distinguish between happiness that comes from things and happiness that doesn't rely on things. Yeah? So there's this idea that by getting happiness out of giving things away, so you're not attaching your happiness to the thing because you've given it away, then you can then discover a deeper meaning for happiness from the thing, the happiness that doesn't rely on those material objects. So non-material happiness. People can give for different reasons, and the Buddha went into quite a lot of detail about better or worse reasons for giving. The ones that are not so great are in the red, and the better ones are in the green, if not too small for you to read. So some less noble reasons might be to get something in return, so rather self-centered reasons, or to giving under duress, or giving to pay back past favors, or giving in order to procure a future favor. And there's not really very much merit per se or spiritual energy in those sorts of giving, any more than virtue signaling or giving away free samples to boost retail sales. There's nothing wrong with such giving, but it's not really what we're talking about in this context. Whereas more noble reasons for giving, the sort of pure intention behind giving, would be things like giving for giving's sake, giving simply for the sake of it, yeah? Giving to keep up a family tradition. Let's say your family has always been generous traditionally, never passing a beggar on the street without giving them something at least. Then keeping up that sort of tradition would be seen as something worth doing. Giving out of sympathy for, let's say, the monastic community, or out of a sense of appreciation for teachings received. Giving in order to make yourself a more praiseworthy person. It's not that you're fishing for compliments, but generally the wise tend to praise those who are generous by nature. And giving to improve the quality of the mind, and giving to pave the way towards a better rebirth. So supposing you were to want to give in the right way, I try to make it a little bit simpler by saying that there's almost like a checklist which you can go through in your own mind to see whether to check through the positive intention and which would best accompany an act of generosity. So it might mean selecting an appropriate gift, making yourself pure as a giver, which means often to do with your own conduct and intentionality, and afterwards not harboring any regrets. So the first thing is to make a positive intention or wish. As a Buddhist, you might recollect the virtues of the Triple Gem before an act of generosity to spark joy in yourself about the good thing which you are about to do. Ever tried that before? Spark joy? Sometimes simply by remembering to do that, it can completely transform your state of mind. And then you follow through. If you don't follow through, it can be rather disastrous because there's a certain teaching in the Anguttara Nikaya called the Vanicca Sutta, which says that if you pledge something but don't follow through on it, then it will be bad karma for you in the future, which will undermine the success of any, let's say, business transactions you do. Some people therefore like to declare an intention overtly as an act of resolve. For example, if you've seen almsgiving ceremonies here at the temple, then sometimes the people say certain verses to declare their intention before they make a gift. Yeah? And if you come here at lunchtime, they've got a whole sort of set of verses they go through. Oh, I ask permission to offer a certain midday meal to the monks or whatever. Yeah? That's part of the intentionality of which is then followed through on. Sometimes, if it's food on a tray, the Buddhists will hold it up to their forehead to make a wish on the basis of the food they're about to offer before they offer it. And sometimes, yes, but you should take care of what you wish for. I had the unfortunate experience of being with a bunch of women who had it in for each other, and they wished that their enemies met with a sticky end. So that would not be a skillful example of something to wish for. Yeah. And often the sort of good intention or a good wish might be an example of it. Might be something like. You see the word Suttinang Vatamedanang Asavakaya Vahang Hotu. That's the Pali word for it. May these alms that I have given on this day be for an end of all defilements. Or may this be for the benefit of my loved ones, for example. But generally, the wish would end up with something like, and may I reach nirvana without delay. Nibbana pacayo hotu. So, an appropriate gift, nicking flowers from the park to give at the temple, really the pure intentionality is not quite there. The joy is not really truly sparked by that sort of attitude, generosity. Often people, if it's giving things to monks or giving things as a gift, like to give something which is of a little bit better quality than they would normally use themselves. Can you see why? If it comes to something like giving someone bruised fruit or leftovers or having a whip round, although it might be a useful way to help someone who is poor or needy, but from the point of view of elevating the state of mind, it's a rather different feeling. I think you would agree. And yes, don't forget that not all giving is financial in nature. Objects of generosity which are non-physical might be sharing knowledge, either vocational knowledge or spiritual knowledge, letting go of your anger for somebody, behaving in a humble way, helping others out by volunteering, transferring merit to others, maybe a loved one who has passed away, and also showing your appreciation if you see someone else who's doing something good or who has had some good fortune. So instead of being jealous of them. So generally, if it comes to material gifts of some sort, for things which you can't go wrong on, generally speaking, would be clothing, food, shelter, medicine. What are known as the 4 basic requisites. Sometimes they go into a little bit more detail than this, especially with things that can be given to, let's say, a monastic community. Food may be given, but not aphrodisiacs. Drinks may be given, but not alcohol, which you should remember if you're the sort of person who likes to turn up at someone's door with a bottle of wine. Cloth or clothing, okay, but not immodest clothes. Vehicles or transport generally. Shoes are also counted as vehicles. Fare for traveling in public transport, flowers, candles, incense, medical creams, bedclothes, beds, shelter, and also fuel for heating, that sort of thing. Failing that, money can also be a gift, because that can be used to buy any of the things I've already mentioned. Some gift things might lead to the opposite of positive energy being generated. For example, the usual categories of vice or sleaze, alcohol for anything other than cleaning or disinfectant, matchmaking services, cigarettes, weapons, musical instruments, poison, or drugs. So, in conclusion, a gift that would lead to the fruitful practice of generosity would be clean, refined, attractive to receive. And at the time of giving, you should try to relinquish your attraction to the object. And there's a tradition in Thailand that if you're going to give flowers, you don't sniff the flowers beforehand. So good to know. Fun fact. And being a person who is in a pure state of mind or a high state of mind, either by having meditated or being well established in the precepts, would be something like amplifying the joy felt by an act of generosity. So in conclusion, there are generally 4 pure things involved with an effective, an act of generosity that is effective in uplifting the mind. And that would be the gift itself is appropriate, well chosen, not inappropriate. Secondly, your intention would be pure, it not being given for the wrong reasons, both before, during, and after the act of giving. Thirdly, the person who receives it ought to be someone who you feel is worthy as a recipient. For example, if you give money to a beggar on the street who you think is going to buy a cup of tea or a sandwich with it, and you see them later drinking whiskey, then how do you feel about that? Like you've been had? So it's because the nature of the recipient has somehow let you down as an unreliable person. So the Buddha taught to be fairly selective about who you single out for your generosity. And we'll see more about this later on in the subsection on helping various members of your family. And you yourself should be pure of heart when you give something. A story to finish off with. Okay, a quick story about an exemplary act of generosity which didn't involve money. And this is a story from many aeons ago of the Bodhisattva, the present Buddha in a previous lifetime, when he was cultivating perfections. At that time there was a previous Buddha still around in the world, and the previous Buddha was called Dipankara. So what you see there is the previous Buddha, and who you see lying on the ground is the Buddha to be in our present era. So the Buddha to be is still cultivating his perfections in order to be a Buddha in the future. And the Buddha to be, the Bodhisattva at that time, his name was Sumedha, and he was a hermit. You know what a hermit is? What is a hermit? As someone who's like an ascetic who practices spiritual cultivation, maybe lives in the forest, survives off fruit, maybe dresses in simple bark or fabric which he's made himself from natural sources. Okay, So in a time when there's no Buddhism around, then generally that is the best people can do as a spiritual way of life. So he had become one of those because the Buddha had not yet arisen in the world for him to learn from. So Sumedha the hermit. And one day, seeing as he had cultivated his meditation to a very high level, he was actually able to float through the air as a result of his psychic powers. And as he was floating through the air one day, he saw that all the villagers were in a hurry to finish building a road. And when he came down to ground level again and asked them what they're up to, they said, "Oh, we are in a hurry to finish this road because we have heard that the Buddha and his community of monks are about to pass through our area, and we would like the road to be finished before they arrive." And he thought to himself, "Oh, this would be a very good opportunity for me to practice generosity." So they thought, "Well, you've got all these magical powers. We'll give you a special piece of road that's going to be really hard for you to fix." So they gave him a particularly badly damaged part of the road. But because he was wanting to get the maximum of results from his generosity, he decided to do it all by hand, without using any magical powers. So he got out his bucket and spade and started to fill in a gap in the road. And it took so long that by the time the Buddha turned up, he hadn't quite finished his section of the road. So he thought, no problem, I will just lie in the remaining hole in the road. And in this picture, it shows him lying down on his front, but according to our teacher in Thailand, you should look at the inset above. There, actually, he said that he lay on his back with his hands in a gesture of prayer, and invited the Buddha and all of the company of monks to walk over him like a human bridge. So a little bit more of sacrifice than Sir Walter Raleigh laying down his cloak in the puddle or whatever. But it turned out that even though the Buddha and all the monks walked across him, he was so filled with joy by his privilege to be able to practice generosity in such a way on that occasion that all of them seemed completely weightless passing over his body. And at the end of that, having been walked over by all those monks, the Buddha turned back to him and said, "You are going on to be the next Buddha for sure, and you only have to wait 100,000 more aeons, and you'll get to be a Buddha like me." And generally, the prediction from a previous Buddha is the final sort of the final factor which a bodhisattva needs in order to reach Buddhahood. So it's like once you've had that prediction in place, then all you need to do is put in the time and good effort, and you will reach Buddhahood for sure. So this is an example of a very unusual form of generosity on behalf of the Bodhisattva, but it was the one which cemented his place in becoming a Buddha in the future. So, and a very important part of his cultivation of the perfections. So, for today, I will just leave you with a couple of announcements for those who don't already know. Next full moon coming up will be Tuesday, the 14th of June. I think we'll have it in person and online. It will be aligned with the normal Tuesday class. There's still places on the European Monk Ordination Program, which starts at the beginning of June and is going to be held in Denmark. And also, we still have an early bird rate available for the weekend retreat between 8th and 10th July. It's somewhere down near Yeovil in Somerset at a place called the Open Pathway Retreat Center. So you might want to look up the meditationsurrey.com website that has all the details there.